Welcome to Manna at the Tap, a podcast from Tapestry Ministries. Each episode reflects on a daily Bible reading from the Revised Common Lectionary. I'm Jennifer, a fellow traveler on a spiritual journey with the Tapestry community. We call the daily Bible reading our spiritual manna. It nourishes our souls, fostering spiritual growth as we share insights and interpretations that enrich our spiritual lives. Today is Tuesday, May the 6th, 2025, and we are in the third week of the season of Easter. The lectionary reading is from the New Testament book of Acts. The book of Acts is like a series, and each of the vignettes is like an episode in the series. And these episodes tell us about the lives of key apostles in that first 30 or 40 years after Jesus' ascension. The series was written by Dr. Luke, pardon me, who also authored the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Luke. We encountered Saul of Tarsus in our reading yesterday, and Saul continued to transform from a persecutor of the followers of Jesus into a great champion of the good news of following Jesus. Barnabas and Dr. Luke, as well as many others, worked alongside Saul, helping him as he learned and grew. It's encouraging to see the stories of great leaders of faith on their journey of transformation. Being a follower of Jesus is both the work of an instant and the work of a lifetime. Our reading today is from Acts chapter 26. Now, between yesterday's reading and today's reading, there are only 17 chapters, just a few pages. But if we trace the story and add up the years, today's narrative takes place many years later. Saul, who was also known as Paul, left Jerusalem shortly after yesterday's story, and he spent many years traveling from place to place, telling people about Jesus' resurrection, about forgiveness of sins, about a place of belonging in the family of believers. Sometimes Paul and his companions would stay for a day or two in a place, and sometimes, like in Ephesus, they would stay for 3 years. Everywhere Paul went, he preached and taught. Dr. Luke tells us that Paul gave constant encouragement, lifting their spirits and charging them with fresh hope. That's from Acts chapter 20, verse 2. Often, the group of Paul and his friends left a town when riots and bad feelings started to emerge. Following the way of Jesus changed some people's lives for the better and infuriated others. Still, Paul and his companions carried on in their work, fulfilling the call that Jesus had given to Paul all those years before on the road to Damascus. After all these years away, Paul wanted to return to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of Pentecost. So, like Jesus, he set his face toward Jerusalem, despite many people warning him of trouble. And indeed, once he was in Jerusalem, trouble arose. His life was in danger, and he was placed in prison initially to keep him safe from the band of murderers. Paul was kept in prison in a few different locations and under different political leaders for about 2 years. If you listen to the reading on the tapestryministries.ca website, you will hear that in today's reading, Paul was in front of King Agrippa, his wife Bernice, and the governor Felix. They tell Paul that he can tell them about himself. So Paul starts to tell the story of his own life. And he does that with the attention of a great orator. Now, every time we tell or write our own story, there are different threads that come to the surface. In this telling, Paul emphasizes his own history as a very accomplished member of the Jewish religious leadership. He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. And now, as a man of maturity, he saw his following of the way of Jesus as being the greatest fulfillment of his early training. Paul also confesses to King Agrippa and Bernice and Festus that he didn't always feel that way and that he had persecuted the very people who followed the way of Jesus. For more of that story of persecution, you can watch the May 5th, 2025 podcast on Acts 9. Now, Paul had intended to snuff out the followers of Jesus, but instead, Jesus interrupted Paul on his way to Damascus and lit a new fire within him. If you've ever heard someone talk about having a Damascus Road experience, they're talking about having an experience just like Paul did, where they are interrupted, where they're turned toward a new way of living and called toward a life of meaning and purpose. On the road to Damascus, Jesus says to Paul, I've handpicked you to be a servant and a witness to what has happened today and to what I'm going to show you. I'm sending you off to open the eyes of the outsiders so that they can see the difference between dark and light and choose light, that they can see the difference between the intruder and God and choose God. I'm sending you, Paul, off to present my offer of sins forgiven and a place in the family, inviting them into the company of those who begin real living by believing in me. Those are the words of Paul's call from Acts 26, verses 16 to 18. Now, Paul goes on to tell more of his story. That's outside of our reading for today. And as the years that follow open up in front of him, even in the suffering and challenges of being in prison, of being shipwrecked, of being brought to trial before Caesar, Paul continues to invite people into the company of those whose lives are made real, authentic, whole by following Jesus. So I wonder, you also have a story like Paul has a story. What is your story? What has Jesus spoken to you? And how are you telling or writing the story of Jesus' invitations to you? Thanks so much for joining us today for Manna at the Tap. God bless you.